happy day, whatever it is today. I wanted to begin with welcome back. And my producer said, you don't know if they're new when they're listening. So then I decided, well, I'll say happy Monday. Well, then he reminded me that some people listen on Tuesday or Wednesday. So then I thought I'd start with happy day. So happy day. It could be night. They could be listening at night. Happy moment. Happy moment. So glad you're here. Today, I am so excited, or tonight, whatever it is for you. I'm so excited for you to hear from my friend, Melanee Marshall. I met her over 10 years ago in the lobby at the YMCA. Her daughter, Amara, and my daughter, Zoe, were taking ballet, and we bonded over scissor skills in the lobby. And then she ended up telling me about a book she wrote at that time, which just completely fascinated me. I ended up buying it for my kids. It's called I'm Supposed to Be Here. It's a children's book following her journey and her experience with her son. So it's a beautiful book, and Melanee is magnetic. She is sunshine. She loves sharing pictures of suns, and it's so fitting because she is sunshine. She has a passionate, loving warmth to every story she tells. So I'm so excited that you get to meet her and hear her heart. We talked about creativity, and we talked about her work with Closet Creatives, which is an adventure that she launched. And she has so many different creative passions. She also leads a group called Dismantling the Divide, which is a group that meets 1 to 2 times a month that helps bridge the divide racially in the church. And so she's just done so much that inspires me and enlightens me and educates me. And I'm just excited to share her with you. So enjoy.
Welcome
To celebrate.
To celebrate.
Story.
Welcome to Celebrate Story.
Meanderings in motherhood. Motherhood.
With my mom.
My mom.
It's my mom. With my mom.
With my wife.
Joy Randall.
Julie Wagner.
Julie Wagner.
We're technically on and we're starting. It's happening.
Oh
We're here.
Gosh, I hear you in my ear. This is so amazing.
I'm so excited you're here. This is so fun and it feels so official. And I told Steve that in a decade ago, it was always like, oh, you meet someone, which is where I met you, the Y or church. And it's like, it used to be about a play date, right? But I was like, this phase of my life is like, who wants to come over for my podcast?
How about that?
Let's lock the door, close the curtain. Let's not even pretend it's a play date. Let's close the curtain.
How about that?
And it's so, thank you for joining me because there is so much. I've known you now over 10 years, and our circles are sometimes closer than others, like our intersecting around our kids' lives circles. Because we first met when Amara, your younger child, your daughter,
My youngest, yes.
and my daughter Zoe were in ballet at the YMCA. That's when I first remember meeting you.
Yep. They were 3?
Yes.
3 years old?
They were so little.
Yes.
And I just remember bonding with you because you were an educator. And we were talking, I think. We talked education because I remember you were talking. I just remember bonding you over scissor skills we were talking about scissor skills with our preschoolers.
Oh my gosh, I remember that. That's hilarious.
In that lobby of the YMCA.
Yes.
And then when we were both in like a mech rhythm on Saturday nights, I would see you on Saturday nights there. And then, of course, before the pandemic, our stars were circling together and you were leading a group called Be the Bridge. And of course, we had one meeting.
A fantastic meeting.
Yes.
Fantastic first meeting. Wow.
Yes. It was such a great first meeting. And then we put it on pause for a couple weeks until the pandemic.
I think, 2 days later, we were in quarantine. I want to say it was like that week.
It was it's weird.
Yeah.
How much time, I don't understand time with the pandemic passing. And so then you went on to launch a group called Dismantling the Divide.
I did.
And that's what one of the three things I would love to talk about today. And then I want to talk about anything you want to talk about. But I want to hear about Closet Creatives.
Okay.
I want to hear about Dismantling the Divide. And I also want to hear about, I want to talk about, I invited you over one time on, I think it was like Martin Luther King Day or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, talk to my kids and I want to hear your heart on this. And you taught us so much, and we still talk about that day.
Do you really?
Yes. And then over the years, I know we've intersected. I've asked you questions. I'm going all over the place, and Steve's going to have to cut this out. But I want to talk about all the things. So I don't even know where to start. Where would you prefer to start?
I think I need to preface, because now people are going to be like, who is this woman? I discovered a term maybe 2-3 years ago, and it is me. And I feel so much comfortable now that I have a label that I can paste on myself. I am a multi-passionate, hyper-creative.
Multi-passionate, hyper-creative. I love that. That is so you.
When I heard it, it was just like, I do fit in the world somewhere, because I am all over the place. And I remember my dad saying, my dad has always been so gracious to me. He's just like, you'll find something. You'll find something, because I just love learning. I want to know about everything, just about. So I'm like that little squirrel following the little nut. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, I could never. So maybe we should talk about Closet Creatives first.
Yes. Let's talk about Closet Creative, because I'm so inspired by that.
I niche a career around it because my interests changed. I was an educator. I worked in the court. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a judge. I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be a singer. I wanted to be a model. I wanted to be all the things.
To do it all.
And there's who can do that.
But
So,
you have done it.
I've done it, but none of it has been enough to monetize.
None of it has been enough to monetize. Oh.
So it's just been, I feel like I've always felt like I was a scatterbrain, and I was always envious of those people who knew they wanted to be, like my daughter wants to be a dentist, and she knew it at ballet class. At 3 years old, I want to be a dentist. She's 13. I want to be a dentist. She knows.
She knows what she wants.
I wanted to be a dentist maybe for 2 minutes, and then I was like, yeah, that's fun. But
and then she went on.
So one of the things I've learned about multi-passionate people is that we are interested in something until we're not. We want to learn all that we can, and that is so me. I want to absorb all that I can about it while I'm interested in it. And then when I'm not, I'm done. I'm okay. I'm like, okay, well, that was fun. Moving on. What's next? So Closet Creatives just allows me to pour into whatever I'm interested into in the moment and drag a bunch of people in with me. And then we explore it, we do it, and then I'm done with it. I'm like, okay, that was fun.
That's
and then
so
we can move
cool.
on to something else. So that's kind of, as I look back on how it was shaped and how it was founded, and I was like, that had everything that I've done up into my life up to this point has been preparing me for what I do now. So it's just, God, it's so cool.
And what inspired you to start to just spark this creativity with others? I mean, it seems like you help pull the creativity out of them. Mm-hmm. So tell me about our listeners may not know anything about it. Tell us about it from square one.
I will tell you what my tagline is.
Okay.
And then we can kind of
Go from there.
So I design unique experiences that ignite and liberate creativity. And so I do a dinner party. We have a appetizer, entree, and dessert. My daughter does. We usually have a signature cocktail drink. So I come and I invite you to dinner. We eat together. We get to know each other. We play some games. We laugh. We have some fun. And then we create together. And the catch is you just don't know what it'll be until you get there. And I do that purposely because I don't want anybody to count themselves out of an activity that they may even enjoy, they may even love. I've had so many people who have come and have said, I would have never thought I'd do that. And now they do that. Like I have a girl who came and she does alcohol inks. And she actually led a Closet Creatives last year doing alcohol inks. And she came she didn't know anything about alcohol inks until she came to a closet.
Alcohol inks are.
I don't know either, but we had so much fun.
You figured it out.
So what I do is and it just feeds my passion because I want to learn about it. So I'll learn the basics, but if I can find somebody who can facilitate, who's like a professional, I'd much prefer it that way. But I'll learn enough to learn the basics to lead a Closet Creatives event. that's kind of what I did with Alcohol Eeks. I knew enough. I had played around with them enough to kind of just do an intro, and that's what I did. We did like a little intro on some tiles and some other materials. She, let's see, she's one of my clients. I'm a loctician too. So she's one of my clients, and she would bring me little things that she had done. And I'm like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Oh my gosh. And so she just asked me last year, could I facilitate, a Closet Creatives experience? I'm like, absolutely. And we had the best time. It was for Juneteenth. So she she used her Cricut and she made all kinds of, Juneteenth related activity, phrases. And we put them on tiles and we blew straws and we dropped ink and she showed us how, and she's so much better at it than I am. So
you became the bridge.
Yeah. And I love that. I love being that.
What is the relationship for you and even your participants? Maybe I'm so curious to hear your heart and your thoughts on the relationship of creativity and healing. What is the relationship like that for you?
So to be honest, that's how the birth of Closet Creatives has been a formation of years and years. I go back and I say what I think the initial birth was another client of mine when I'm originally from Detroit, and she was elderly. She couldn't come to me, so I would come to her house. And her house, I remember walking in, her house was like a museum. She had artwork everywhere, and just, it's just an experience I will never forget, walking into someone's home and just being inspired and mesmerized. And so we would sit at a table, and I would be behind tightening her locks, and people would just come. She'd have her table was spread out with all kinds of knickknacks, like not real art supplies, just, I don't know, scraps of fabric, paper, string, glue. And she'd make cards and all these wonderful things. And she'd always say, Melanee, I see art in everything. I see art in everything. And so I just loved being in that environment. I have been such an artist supporter, a creative supporter, art supporter. I bought artwork. I loved anything in the creative field, music, anything. I loved it, but I never really thought it was for me. Like I would be a person who did it. I would just be a supporter. But I'd watch people would come to her house when I was doing her hair, and they'd come, she'd invite them to sit at the table, come create with me. That's what she'd say. And
come create with me.
I just love that. Loved it. So that kind of planted a seed in my heart. Then we moved here to Charlotte. I was extremely lonely. I missed the art. When we moved to Charlotte in 2005, there was nothing going on in the art scene creatively. Or if it was, I couldn't find it. And so, long story short, Millie, that was her name. Millie would have these totes, and she would go to this store in Detroit called Arts and Scraps. And Arts and Scraps was just that. It was whatever people, wallpaper suppliers or Home Depot would just give them what they didn't want anymore. And they'd sell it. You come in, you get a brown paper bag, grocery bag, fill it up with what you want, $3.
Oh my.
So I started doing that. For what reason? I don't know. Because I had no interest in actually doing any of it. I just thought it was a novel idea. I would go, it was right around not too far from where I lived at the time. I'd just go and do it. So I had literally these totes of just stuff. Oh, that's right. I was a teacher. So I think I was saying at the time, I was like, oh, I'll use them in my classroom.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the thought.
Teachers are always grabbing supplies.
I'll find some kind of project. So that was the thought. We're moving house to house. We move across the country with these totes. And I remember we were in this space, and it was such a dark space at the time. We had just foreclosed on our house. We had lost both our cars. It was just, everything was boom, 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 boom. And we had 2 kids, and Hayden, with special needs. And it was just so much coming at me at a time. And I remember, and I was telling my husband, I was like, I just want to go home. I hate this place. I hate being here. I don't like being here. And I miss art. I was like, I just want to see some art. I just want to go to an art show. I was just whining. And he looked at me.
Lamenting.
Okay, I'll lament. That's such a prettier word. And
being human.
I was human in the moment. That was a moment of real humanity for me. And I'm not a feeler, so that was a lot for me to even admit. But I remember he was standing there as I was sitting at the table. He's like, why don't you get one of those totes out of the garage and make what you miss? And so I was like, okay. And I remember I walked to the garage. I got a tote. I brought it in. And at that time, all I remember was I knew how to take magazine pages and rip them up and make them into these little rods and roll them up. So I would bring in the magazines and I would just rip them in and roll them up. And I started like figuring and putting it together. And I worked on it all that night. I remember I worked all into the night. I felt wonderful. I felt lifted. And then there was a point where I didn't even care what it looked like. It just felt good to do it. It just felt good to be working with my hands and making whatever this was going to be. And it turned out really nice and kind of put it to the side. But it started an addiction. I was like, I can do this. I can do this. So I started doing a little here, a little there. One of the funniest things about it, Julie, is I'm not an artist in terms of painting. Like I can't see you and sketch you and paint you really nice. So I like to work with textures and materials. I like to work with fabrics and anything, buttons. Give me something tactile so I can glue it. And now that I'm years later talking to who I would think were like real artists back in the day, they look at my stuff and they're like, oh my God, that is so fascinating. I can't do that. And I'm like, really? I'm like, all I do is grab stuff and glue it on the board.
All I do is
and I'm looking at your stuff like marveling because you can see. And that is another thing that just gave me such an appreciation for creativity. It comes in all kinds of ways. And that was one of the biggest things I want to relate to anybody who comes is your creativity should not look like mine. If it does, you're doing it wrong. And your creativity does not always have to come in a specific form. It does not have to be painting. It could be numbers. It does not have to be drawing. It could be laying tile. It runs
So
the whole
beautiful.
spectrum. And I want people to tap into that and know that we are all, if God made you and you're for breathing, you're creative.
Oh,
That's it.
amen.
That's it.
Amen. Yes, because if we're created in God's image, then it's our very DNA.
Absolutely.
Right?
The first thing we learn about God is what?
That he's a creator and that we're made in his image. And what do you think the relationship is? Why do you think it's so hard for so many of us to value our creativity? Why is it so easy? It's so common to be like, there, because I see myself in your story. Oh, they're creative. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I admire that creative. Like, why is it so easy to pedestalize someone else's creativity and like devalue my own? Why is that? What do you think that is?
Something happens in kindergarten and first grade. I almost remember mine. I don't remember the teacher, but I remember that moment of someone's work being valued more than my work. You know what I'm saying? So they got the praise. I thought I did a good job, but maybe not as good as that. So maybe I'm not.
It starts so early.
It starts so early. And I was just telling my daughter, she likes basketball. I think she loves basketball, but it's something intimidating. We can't quite figure. My husband and I haven't quite put our foot on it. Something's intimidating her, and so she's really hesitant and kind of. I think she really wants to be a good player, but it's like, I don't know, can I? I don't know. And I told her she's got the potential. She looks good on the court, but I don't think she sees it. And I just don't know. I was telling her in 6th grade, we had a dance performance at my school, and we learned a dance, I think, in class, and we had to try out to perform it. I worked my tail off. Because I just knew I was born to be on stage. And I worked my tail off and I practiced. I practiced at home and it was tap dancing. I made my parents buy me the tap dance shoes and the whole nine. I tried out. I got the lead part in our little 6th grade performance. Ecstatic. I remember it must have been after the performance, or I can't remember exactly when. I know I did continue to perform it, so it didn't deter me from performing, but I heard 2 girls say, oh, she only got that part because he felt sorry for her because she's fat. I never danced on stage again. Just shut me down. I've always let that live in the back of my head. So I told my daughter, if those girls were to walk in front of me right today, I wouldn't have a clue who they are. Not a clue. They meant absolutely nothing to me then, and they mean nothing to me now, but yet those words walked and stopped me from potentially being something I could have been. Just
Throwing
listening,
shame.
just because they were jealous, just because they didn't get what I worked really hard for that lead role. So I think that happens to us, and it sits with us. I probably lived decades without even realizing that it was those words that took me off the stage. It wasn't until I was older and going back. And I was like, and you know what? I never was on the stage again. I never danced in front of others. I went to the
Because
Y.
it's so painful to have someone undercut your work with. I wonder, do you think, and I could be projecting my own wrestlings into your story, so stop me if this isn't true. Do you think capitalist culture, it's like there's winners and there's losers?
Oh, we won't even go into there. Now we're moving into dismantling the divide.
Like there's winners and losers. Like there's and you have to tear down the winners. And it's like we have a hyper individualistic society of winners and losers. And so we have to tear down the winners. We have to tear them down at their core, because if you're winning, I'm losing, as opposed to a more community-based culture. It's like celebrating. We have endless celebrations.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. I could be reading my own, but I can relate to that of the voices in my head. And it took so long to uncover where it came from. So that all connects. So it isn't a jump to say that all of the creativity is a space for healing for you. That's, am I hearing or am I reading into that? So that is,
and for
it's like
everyone,
resistance. So that makes me want to jump back to, you were an author. You wrote a book. Can you tell our listeners about your book?
Yes.
Tell us, because that was one of the first things I remember hearing about you also, past our scissors skills conversation. So tell the story. Tell the story about Hayden in your book.
Hayden Parker Marshall was my firstborn. We had a multiple, I want to say my husband and I really literally stopped counting after 8 or 9 miscarriages. It just was just a part of the... but it was like every time I had to argue with the doctor, because I was like, clearly my body is not cut to have children. Can I please get my tubes tied? Can I please? She's like, no, you're too young. We're going to keep trying. I'm like,
8 or 9.
We stopped counting after a certain point. It just was
too devastating.
It was like that led to part of the depression too, because that was all after we moved here, and I hated my job. I got let go of my job. I just hated everything about in that time. But Hayden was our firstborn. But he came at 23 weeks. And so the story is, because I had so many miscarriages, I was watched like just overwatched. And my doctor at the time said, anything out of the ordinary. She said, I don't care how small it is. Call me. So I was at work. I was teaching 4th grade at the time. And I just felt like a little wet. Just not that. But I said, you know what? I'm going to follow her lead. I don't know. So I called her at lunchtime. She said, just come in after work. We'll check you out. That's what I did. Came in, got up on the table. She did what she did. She says, I don't see anything out of the ordinary. I think you're okay. Okay, hopped off. I literally had my hand on the door to walk out the office. She comes zooming around. She says, Melanee, come back. I want to check one more thing. Okay. I was dilated 2 centimeters. So she's like, we're going to have to rush you to the hospital, which so happened to just be right next door. Got to the hospital.
Was it University Hospital?
We were in Concord.
Northeast? Concord.
So we were
okay.
Northeast. And got to the hospital. They immediately were examining me. They had me upside down. Oh gosh, what kind of doctor? I just remember he came in and he says, well, Mrs. Marshall, he says, we don't deliver 23 weeks. He said, the difference between 23 weeks and 24 weeks is monumental. We need you to hold on to them for 1 more week. I'm like, okay, I'll do what I can. I didn't know what that meant or anything. But at that time they had me kind of inverted upside down, trying to just make sure my cervix didn't open anymore. that was like at 3, and at 4, they were rushing me to labor and delivery, and out came Hayden, and he popped out. The husband said it was like a football, like he was like, the doctor was just like, oh, like Ike. And they put him in the isolette next to, and the doctor looked at us and he says, okay, so what do you want me to do? And I think I was so stunned in that moment, Julie. I couldn't say, I was just like, what do you mean? I don't even know what I was thinking in that moment. I just know I was stunned at, what do you want us to do? Because I'm like, don't you all know what to do? I don't know what you do. And my husband, he was like, whatever it takes. So they rushed him off. And later on, I found out that the only reason they worked on him was because he was breathing in that moment, which 23-weekers don't even have developed lungs. So you know that was a work of God, that he was breathing on his own.
Wow.
That was the only reason why they took him to, then they ended up bringing the NICU ambulance, which is so adorable. And they took him right to Presby.
Wait, what do you mean it's so adorable?
It's like all decorated in cartoons.
Oh, okay.
As if a baby can really tell.
As if a baby.
But it's just the cutest little thing. And they rushed him to Presby. And Presby was our home away from home for 7 months. He was in the NICU for 7 months. And that opened up a world people don't even know about. We were like, what is this? Beautiful place, beautiful experience. It was, we were told pretty much every other day that he was not going to make it. It was always a hurdle. Always. He's had 3 surgeries just on his eye. Because eyes, I guess, in utero are the last thing to develop, to fully develop. He had some problems with he had a perforated intestine. So he's had a couple surgeries for those. But to look at him now, I have to convince people that he was a preemie. I literally carry a picture around on my phone because when I tell people, they're like, oh, no, that. I'm like, no, he really was. He was 1 pound. You could literally hold him in one hand and you could see all of his insides, the veins, the arteries. His skin was clear, pale. And so, yeah, he's our meal. So I wrote a book about it. I'm supposed to be here because Hayden Parker Marshall clearly was supposed to be here. He's supposed to be here. And he is his own individual. I just love him. He is such a blessing. And I tell them all the time, I just can't wait to see what you're going to be. I can't wait. It excites me. So that was our first miracle.
You are such a gifted storyteller. I loved hearing that. I loved hearing that.
Julie? My friends tell me all the time because they're like, Melanee, you have a story for everything.
Me too. It's so beautiful and so it's awesome. I just love hearing that.
Such a life. God has been so good to me. Just 50 years, and it's just been awesome. So.
What has been the greatest challenge to taking care of yourself in COVID for you and your family?
Wow. You're not going to believe me. Most people don't. I am such an introvert. Being with people is draining for me. So, and my husband knows this. And as he ages, he's becoming more of an introvert. He's definitely an extrovert when we met. He was the life of the party. So we really didn't mind being quarantined because that's kind of my happy space. My son, Hayden, we have to push him outside. So that was his habit. It didn't really affect us because we were okay with being inside. We were like, okay, we can do this. My daughter, on the other hand, it was hard. I really had to watch her mentally. She really fell into a funk because she thrives off being with her friends. She thrives off being out. She likes to be out and about. I think that was the hardest because we didn't really have a problem quarantining. It wasn't that hard for us. School was a struggle for her. Just that whole 2019, 2020, I just felt like I was her guardian over her soul, just trying to make sure she stayed well and reminding her that this won't be forever. or eventually, I know this will be something you can tell your kids about. You lived during the COVID quarantine. Other than that, I think if I were to look back and say what was the hardest, I think just making sure my daughter stayed well in terms of in her mental.
And she's at such a social age.
And she's such a 7th, 8th grade. It's been tough. Thankfully, none of us have gotten COVID that we know of. I was telling my husband the other day, I was like, I think at this point we all have had we've definitely been exposed. So I don't believe that you can be out in the public, especially with the Omicron. Am I saying it right? Because I want to say Omarion. Sorry, Omarion. but I just think it's just inevitable. I don't see how I don't see how we couldn't live in this space. We can't breathe the same air at this point.
I was wondering the same thing. Like, when did we have it and we didn't know it? But such a mystery, such a hard mystery. Okay, I want to also I want to talk about Dismantling the Divide, because I'll share with the listeners the story that, 2 stories. One, I invited Melanee over to my house about, 7 years ago, because I was like, I just want your voice to talk to my kids about race issues so they can hear it from you. And I'll never forget, you had this creative way. You came in with a Monopoly game and you played Monopoly, but some people got a fair shot at the game. And I think it was 1 or 2 kids that didn't get a fair shot at the game, and they got to see that all play out. And then you so graciously shared your stories of how your life experiences have been that way. And I'll never forget that. That was so helpful. I've shared that with so many people, and it opened up more conversations and deeper conversations, which is what I want. And then another story that I just have to share too. And then I would love to hear more about your heart and just everything you want to share about Dismantling the Divide. Because it's such an inspiration and I've learned so much from you. And I remember when Zach was working at Chick-fil-A, he just started Chick-fil-A. And I remember he came home and he said, Mom, it's really weird. He was like, the teenagers at work that are white talk so horribly about their parents, and the teenagers that are Black are so respectful and have such reverence. He was like, isn't that weird? And of course, I messaged you immediately. I was like, I got to know what Melanee has to say about this. And would you share the story that you told? Because it was such a great story to just help bridge understanding. Like, so I'm going to just turn over the mic. I just had to set those up.
And it's so funny because I've done so much introspection even since then and thinking about it. But yeah, Jennifer Levin, if you ever hear this podcast, I'm sorry. And I love you with all my heart.
She's about to bring you up.
So I am from Detroit, grew up on the East Side. Deep East. It doesn't get any deeper east than where I grew up. And at the time that I was in middle school, the crack epidemic hit Detroit pretty hard. And so I want to say the neighbor 2 doors down, I still remember his name, Mr. Rick. I probably shouldn't call him Mr. Rick, but he was a drug dealer. He was a neighborhood drug dealer. My mom, who we affectionately call Jesus, is head cheerleader. Of course, they butt heads immediately, so I'm assuming, I've never actually asked my parents, but I'm assuming that was the reason why they uprooted us from the east side of Detroit and put us in the suburbs, Southfield, Michigan. And at the time, Southfield, Michigan was all white, like overnight. I feel like it was like 2 weeks and it was like, okay, we're moving, and we moved. And so,
what a transition.
Yeah. And I look back now and I'm like, why did they do that to us? That was so harsh. But it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as God always works. But went to a new middle school in Southfield, Bernie Middle School. And at the time, Southfield had a high Jewish population. And so most of my new friends were Jewish people. And Jennifer Levin was one of them. And she was one of my first friends. And she invited me to go to Fuddruckers with her. Fuddruckers?
This is becoming a theme.
Oh, I forgot about you.
This is,
yes!
I can't even handle how cool that is. Okay,
I
that's
just
awesome.
made the connection. That is awesome.
So
That is
this
awesome.
story took place at Fuddruckers. Wow.
Of course it had to be Fuddruckers, didn't it? We had a wonderful dinner lunch, and it was snowing outside. I remember it was one of the big snows. It was Jennifer, her brother who had a crush on me, I connect with him on Facebook too. Hey, and yeah, it was just the four of us. We walk out into the parking lot, and I remember it was snowing because it had already kind of layered up while we were in Fuddruckers. And I don't know what transpired, what the conversation was between Jennifer and her mother. I just heard Jennifer's response, and her response was, "Mom, why don't you stop being such a bee?"
But she didn't say B.
She did not say bee. I remember stopping, frozen. I was like, surely she's going to die.
She's going to die.
She's going to die
You had
in this
fear
moment.
filling your body.
She's
Like,
going to die.
This is over.
And her mom said, "Oh, Jennifer, stop being so ridiculous."
Just no big deal.
I could still feel the pressure on my poor little heart. And I was just like, oh, so she's not going to die? You're just...
Wow.
And I got in the car. They dropped me off at home. And I remember one occasion. No. So this was way before we even moved to Southwest. So I remember one occasion I came home, and my mom and I don't have the best relationship. And of course, as a teenager, you don't have the best relationship, even if you have a great relationship. I went home and went to my room. Something had transpired between my mom and I. Julie, when I tell you I did not slam the door, I did not slam the door. I didn't. I must have just closed the door, and I probably didn't even close it loudly. My mom burst in there and she said, "You've been hanging out with your white friends too long. You think you're a little white girl? You don't slam the door in my house. I don't know where." I will never forget that.
Oh my goodness.
So that kind of gives
So
you
her impression was this has come from them.
Well,
But she imagined it to happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't a real thing. But that was her.
I did not slam the door. I promise you. I did not slam the door.
I believe you with all my heart.
I know better than that.
I believe you with all my heart. But I'm fascinated with, it's a humorous story as you tell it, but I'm fascinated. So in her mind, this stereotype was long influenced, long before Zach discovered it at Chick-fil-A.
Oh, yeah.
This is so interesting. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
TikTok is a great place to see the difference now. I love watching some people say, white moms and black moms, the difference between white moms and black moms. But in my introspection into thinking about that, I remember my dad has always questioned my parenting because we didn't do a whole lot of spanking. And my parents didn't. I was always scared. So my brother was the one who always was pushing the limits. He probably got spanked a little bit more than I did. But I probably only got spanked 3 or 4 times because I just was like, you just look at me and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm good. I'm not going to do it. And I remember we were visiting my father, and Hayden must have done something. Hayden has a mouth, and he probably said something out of pocket. And my dad kind of looked at me, and then he said, I think I had a conversation with him or told him that was inappropriate or something like that, and that was it. And my dad said, your grandma would have threw a brick at me if I had said that. And I was like, geez, that's kind of harsh. But it started me on this path of thinking because I'm always in my head. That's a whole nother story. But I thought to myself, I was like, you know what? As a black parent raising a black child in white America, you don't have a lot of time to say things over and over again. You don't have a lot of time to have a conversation. My grandmother had 5 kids. She worked full time. There's the big mystery about who my granddad is. No one will answer. Nobody in my family will tell me who he was, but he was some type of awful. And so she was doing this all on her own. And then when my dad was young, of course, he came up in the 50s. There wasn't a lot of grace. Black kids weren't given the benefit of the doubt. Black kids weren't extended any area of grace. So you didn't have the opportunity, they had to walk in line. And so I started thinking about, so I guess that's why Black moms and dads were so strict because they couldn't be anything else in order for survival. It was like survival.
I remember you even referenced in your message, it was a Facebook Messenger, because it like all of a sudden history started clicking in a different direction in that moment for me. You were like, in Jim Crow days, they could have lost their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I don't have time
Yeah.
for you at like a life or death and how that's passed down.
It was
like
that serious. It was that monumental. So I could understand why grandma probably did throw a brick at you, because if a white person heard maybe that smart saying, Hayden saying something smart like that, you didn't know if they wouldn't think it was to them. You just don't know. So you teach them early and you teach them quickly.
And time is not the privilege there.
Yeah.
There's no time.
Yeah, my dad was born in Kentucky, so, South, even though it's still the Southern mentality. And I could understand why grandma would have thrown a brick at him, because she didn't have time to talk to you about it. She didn't have time to explain. And I didn't know how old my dad was at the time. How do you explain to my, maybe he was 8, 7. Maybe she just not, I don't feel like having this race conversation with you. Just shut up. You can't say that. So. Yeah. It's
such a illuminating story to hear that. Yeah. Like, so illuminating. And that's such a perfect bridge to, I'd love to hear more of what you want to share. Explain what Dismantling the Divide is and the work you've been doing during COVID with Dismantling the Divide. It's so inspiring. Tell the listeners about it.
So Dismantling the Divide is still kind of in its formation. I don't really know what the Lord wants to do with it. I'm calling myself being obedient. It is a continual conversation on race in the church. I started with the Be the Bridge. First of all, since I was a little girl, racism has never made sense to me. I think I've told. Have we had that conversation?
Let's have it again on the mic. Let's have it on the mic.
So, with the upheaval of my life, moving from all blackness to all whiteness in 6th grade, I quickly discovered that white people weren't all that wonderful, weren't all that great, and weren't all that smart. And so...
and you had assumed that was true?
You walk in a space if you're, that's what whiteness does. It teaches you subtly that white is the goal. Because they're smarter, they're better thinkers.
So you just remember, what I'm trying to get at is like, you remember just knowing that, like the air you breathed.
It wasn't something, well, my mom and I, we go back and forth with this because she swears she never did, but I'm like, I wouldn't have never gotten it from me. And my brother backs me up on this. I remember when we moved to Southfield, she would say, my dad was always, you got to learn to play the game. You got to learn the game to play the game. So that was kind of, I guess, his thought behind it. My mom, which I think stemmed from her mom, my grandmother, was white was right. I remember my grandmother wouldn't go to a black doctor. She didn't want a black repairman to come in the house. She just thought the white guy was going to do it the right way.
So interesting.
So while it may not have been directly taught, it was subtly understood. And so...
unquestioned.
And unquestioned. Although I did. Especially once we moved to Southfield. And I remember, so one of the things that happened to me, one of the earliest acts of racism that I can remember, if I could put a pin on it, was, of course, I was a black girl from East Detroit, so they put me in all the remedial classes. Well, in Detroit, I was in the gifted and talented program. I was on the gifted and talented track, and because we didn't have a school at the time, we just moved from whatever could house our program from school to school. But when we moved to Southfield, they put me in the remedial. And my mom must have found out, because I didn't know. I just knew the work was easier, but I didn't, I don't know. I was 6 in
you didn't
grade,
know.
So I didn't know what was going on. But my mom got word of it. And I remember she came up to the school very hot and said, no. So I was immediately moved, I guess, into the regular tracking class. But so that was my first little seed of thought, is like, oh, well, they're not so smart white people too. And I'm being way transparent, but that's who I am.
I appreciate it. I
grew up, and my parents are always saying they don't know where, and I don't know where I got it from. But they always are like, Melanee, you have no idea what color you are, do you? Because I just grew up thinking everybody was, I honestly did, Julie. I honestly did. Everybody was the same. There is no, and I'm thinking to I'm seeing what I'm hearing. I'm hearing this racism and white people this and white, but it's not my reality. And I've been spending all my life trying to figure out what I was thinking at that age, but I really didn't. I thought I was smarter than everybody else. It was a pride thing. I just thought I was the smart one and everybody else was stupid, including white folks. It didn't matter. It was like, you all are all stupid.
Because you were seeing things that
by the
no one
time
was
I got
willing
to
to
high
talk about.
school, they were copying off of they were, my white friends were like, again, just me being me. I didn't know that was what was going on. I just figured, sure, you can copy off my paper. Sure, you can. I don't care, But now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, that probably was feeding my ego as well. That was probably feeding into that feeling.
And what child wouldn't do that in your shoes, right?
I guess. I don't know. Because when I talk to my Black friends, they're like, no, that's not.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's been a mystery. My Black friends are like, how did you grow up that way? How did you, one of my best friends, my pastor's daughter, we went to the same school, same high school. We ended up going to a Christian high school. When I got to high school, my parents switched me out of public and put me in a private school. And she went there too. And it's so fascinating to me how we had the same teachers. And it feels like, she's about 3-4 years younger than me, but two completely different experiences. Like, she'll describe things and I'm like, no, she wasn't like that. And she's like, yeah, she was. And I'm like, no. And it's fascinating to me because either I walked, and I know I'm quite naive most of my life, so maybe I walked in this air of naivete, or I just I had a different perspective on the things that were happening to me. I remember my senior year, I had two friends who were dear. I hung out with the white guys. So most of my friends were always white guys. But my senior year, one of them, when I got accepted to the University of Michigan, that was the first time I was kind of like, because he said, oh, well, you just got in for affirmative action or something like that. And I thought to myself, well,
you're copying off my paper.
You just passed that math class because you looked on my paper. Are you kidding me? And so that was the only experience in high school. There was this subtle.
Was it about belonging? I guess that when I made the comment of like anybody would do it, it's like we'll do anything to belong sometimes, even if we regret it later. Like, I just want to belong here. Like this.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know because I know now that I'm a connector. So even in high school, I was the person that was friends with everybody. So I was friends with the Black people. There were only like 3 of us there. I was friends with the Black people, but I was friends with the rich white people. I was friends with the poor white people. And
you were friends with everybody.
I was friends with everybody. And so, I don't know. I don't know if I struggled with belonging per se. But I'm going to think about that.
It's so funny how you don't even know you're reading your own experience into someone else's story. But it's like, I was feeling some of it. And I was like, oh, I would have done it for belonging. Like, okay. I would have done it to which I'm not assuming.
No, that's a good thing to think about though.
It's like, I think back on things I did in high school. It's like, why did I do that? And it was about, just this crisis of who likes me and who do I like and how do I fit in? And which, I know Brene Brown talks about the difference of fitting in and belonging. Like, it's more of I would have done it thinking I was getting belonging. I would have, I was just fitting in. It was like, I don't know. I think those years are so hard because you can't process like you can process in your 40s and 50s. Like, you can just see it so differently.
I don't know. I'm going to think about that.
I loved hearing that story.
Give me something else to.
And I love hearing, I don't love that it was painful, but it's like, what a cut.
It wasn't even painful to me. And that's the thing. The racism that I've experienced has never been, it's always been comical. It comes from ego. It comes from me. My spirit mama is Zora Neale Hurston.
Okay.
And she is a Black author. a Black Harlem Renaissance writer. And she has this quote. Oh, gosh, I'm going to get it wrong. But it is my life. She's like, and her birthday was actually just yesterday, too. So I should know this quote. But it goes along along the way of, I don't care that somebody doesn't like me because I'm Black. Shame on them. I'm the oyster. It's like, why would they not want to know? So I think that I read her when I was younger.
And it connected.
I just knew that made sense to me. Like, I'm not going to internalize that. Shame on you. You're missing out on a gem.
Oh,
So,
that'll
okay.
preach.
Okay. So it's never been, I remember in college when I went to Michigan, I was coming out of a KFC, and my dad is like my driving teacher, so he still lives in my head. So I probably drive a little slower, and I probably follow all the rules because my dad lives in my head. And I must have taken too long to come out or something. And I pulled out finally, and the lady behind me, she's like, "You nigger!" And the girls that I was with, they were like, "Did you hear what she called you? Did you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Isn't that hilarious?"
You just thought it was funny.
I was like, that poor dear. She's such a dummy.
So does this shock your family the way that it's just...
They're like, "You're crazy. What the heck is wrong with you?"
But it's like you've just not... Do you think it's because do you think it's your unique wiring, or do you think it's also you... I thought it was so interesting how you juxtaposed the experience. You went from an all-Black neighborhood to an all-white neighborhood, and you just saw things differently. Do you think that shaped some of the ways you saw it?
I know that shaped the way I saw things. I definitely know that. But I think it has attributed to my weird way. It just, racism has never, and to say that it doesn't make sense is, I'm not denying that it exists, because it's definitely America. It's just, for me, I remember thinking, how absurd is that to think that I'm different from you simply because of my skin color? How absurd. That just is the dumbest thing to measure the worth of humanity on skin color. And then I've been blessed to go to such a great church that I've always had a spiritual backing. So then, knowing sin nature, knowing humanity, I'm able to make sense of it. Because, God tells us in Proverbs, our hearts are exceedingly wicked. Every single one of us. So I just told my husband, cut all of these things, Steve.
No, this is all so good. I love this because this is a natural transition to church and God and spirituality, which is the last point that I wanted to make sure we covered. So this is perfect. So I have to ask you a question because I know you will tell me exactly what you think. Yes. And you have such a different experience. So I'm so curious because I absolutely hear you and I agree because I think so many of us, I think what the Enneagram helped me practice is see like the shadow side. And that helped me ask more questions about my true intentions and going deeper. And so like, I hear that like the shadow side, we all have this wickedness. I heard something recently and I like keep chewing on this and I'm curious what your thoughts are in response. So I think it was Richard Rohr that said, Genesis 1 comes before Genesis 3. Like in Genesis 1, we were all created, and we talked about in the beginning with creativity, like we're all created and declared very good. And in Genesis 3, it, the sin, the fall, and that so much of Western Christianity focuses on which I know you weren't saying that was the only thing because we started talking about the goodness. I'm just curious what you think about that, like spirituality wise, that so much of church is about you're evil, you're wicked. And then how does that contribute to racism and dealing with these issues, like losing a sense of like dealing with shame and casting the shame on someone else when really it's in us, as opposed to holding these supposedly paradoxical ideas of we are very good and we are very wicked. Like to hold those two extremes is a reckoning. Like, I don't know. What do you think about that? I want to hear your thoughts.
That parlays exactly to where I was going. So my husband and I, we talk race quite a bit in our house. Sometimes I don't want to say too much, but it's quite a bit of our conversation. And I watch CBS Sunday Morning every Sunday. It's a ritual. It's my Sunday morning moment. Don't bother me. I take pictures of the sun and I put them on my Instagram page.
I love that.
It's at I am CBS Sunday Morning. So,
I love it.
so that's just I just love this show. I love the human. I just like the humanness it shows. My husband will occasionally watch. The kids I have to make watch, but my husband, he'll come down sometimes and bear with it with me. And today, as we were watching, what were we watching? They were doing something on Trump. They were doing something on Kennedy. And so he looks up to me in the moment. He says, I figured out why I hate this show. He's like, it's doing nothing but making white people feel good. And so I told him, I was like, yeah, I can actually see that because it is a feel-good show. I mean, it is.
Did your husband say this or hate it?
No, my husband.
Husband said this?
Yeah. I said, yeah, I see what you're saying. I can get that. I can understand that. And we kind of went back and forth. He was like, yeah, they're putting a Band-Aid on, look at what they're doing with Trump. And they're trying to make it look like, he did some good. And I told him I got it. But then as we were talking more, I said to him, I said, what sometimes we as Black people have to understand or realize or come to, or bite the bullet, swallow the pill, is that, okay, Julie, here we go. I've been thinking, the more I learn, I feel like the less I know. And so as I'm thinking about history, and this is my first time sussing this out in public, so forgive me if it makes no sense. I think we only know a smidgen of what's gone on in this world prior to us, just a smidgen. And I'm not saying this to excuse racism at all, but I often think if we as Black Africans were the very first, I don't know what kind of crap we did way back, who knows how long ago. I don't know if we're suffering the consequence of the evils that we have done. And I'm not going to pretend that we didn't if we were in charge. Like I said, I'm just sussing this out right now. So I say all of that to say, I had to swallow a pill. I remember talking to a good friend of mine, and she was like, because I'm so pro-Black. I love being Black. I am pro-Black. And I must have been on that tangent. And she looked up at me, and she was another Black woman. She looked up at me and she says, Melanee, you do know that if we were in charge, it'd be the same thing. And I was like, oh, shoot. I didn't like it. I didn't want to hear it. But at the end of the day, I know humanity. I know what the base of all of our hearts are. And I had to sit with that, and I had to agree. And so I told my husband that. I was like, well, dear, I can't say that if we were in charge, it would look differently. And so his argument was, or his retort back was, no. He was like, because we're just not that, I want to say animalistic. I can't remember the word he used, but something along that line. But I know that's a hard, bitter pill to swallow, especially if you're not spiritual per se. And I know that whiteness has used that as an excuse. Oh, well, we're all human. So I'm not, again, I don't want to negate the heaviness and the consequences of racism in this country particularly. I just want to know, for me, it is a spiritual fight, which birthed Dismantling the Divide. Because what I was finding is that we would have these Be the Bridge moments, 9 weeks, and it would either introduce the concept to a lot of white folk or get them started, and then it would kind of just stop. And I would end up having people who still had questions and want to know more or just want to have conversations. You know, I can tell you to read a book, which you should. You know, read a book, listen to a podcast. But some people just want to have a conversation. And so that's how it kind of was birthed, is Dismantling the Divide is just a continuing conversation. And we come together normally without an agenda. We just talk about what's happening and juxtapose that with what Christ expects, what the church expects. So we do a lot of, as the last couple of sessions, we've been balancing that with the Old Testament. I think the prophets, the prophetic books are so rich in lessons for us to learn in this country about racism and God's consequences. We look at Babylon. And so let's see, how do I want to frame this? The Israelites just were always, and it's interesting to me, the parallels, even though America considers themselves the new Israelites, which is hilarious to me. But, or the now ones, but, the parallels still aren't lost, you know, especially if, the whole point of Dismantling the Divide for me in my heart is, hey, if we're really going to call ourselves Christ followers, we really need to be careful. We really need to do that. We can't continue to call ourselves a church and actually function in a racist society. I think that rips God's heart apart more than anything else, because if nothing else, he created our differences, our diversity is a reflection on how creative God is. It is not a rip to tear us apart. It is a moment for us to be gloried and just be like, oh my God, look how you look how you worship, look how you see. That is to bring us together. That is what the unity in 1 Corinthians is all about. So I look at the like we were talking about Ezekiel and Daniel and how all those prophets were like telling Israel, you're still not getting it right. 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 And Israel kept saying, oh, but I want to worship this God. Oh, but I want to do this. And God gave them warning after warning after warning. And they didn't listen. And that's what I feel is happening with us, the church, is God is like extending grace after grace and warning after warning. And we are just going further and further away when, if anything, all of our differences, whether it be color, culture, whatever, it should be bringing us together. So I always say the church is we got to get it right. We can't expect the world to get it right. And the church didn't get it right. And so that's kind of the heart behind it, is just a continuing conversation. So we've talked about CRT. So we spent the last half of last year, before we broke, doing a really semi-in-depth examination of CRT, because the whole premise was, is it really as bad as it just says? First of all, I would tell them I don't remember CRT until I got to college, so it's not something that's being taught in elementary school. It's not foundational. And not only that, has anybody ever taken the time to really examine what it's saying and see, maybe there is some merit to this theory? So that's what we did. We're going to start again at the end of this month. And I don't know. Julie, every meeting, I don't know where the Lord is going to take us. I just pray, Lord, lead, do your thing. And
is it still on Thursdays? Is it every other Thursdays?
It's going to be once a month this year.
Okay.
Just because Amara in the basketball and the jump rope and her life really pulls me in different directions. But I think
I get that.
Yeah,
sports with middle school and high schoolers.
Oh my gosh,
doing me in
killing me
on the evenings.
It's killing me.
But is it recorded for people to?
It is not.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about
because
that.
I'd pay to listen to it afterwards, since I'm going back and forth to softball and football, and
okay.
I'm just curious.
We do Zoom it, so there's no reason why.
I was just curious
because
I'm like, I hate that. I know I tried to tag into one, and I was literally in the car.
Okay.
So,
okay.
But I was just curious, just throwing that out there because I was remembering what you said
maybe
earlier.
We will. I'll talk about it this month and see how they feel.
This has been so rich. Like, my head is spinning. I'm gonna forget. I'm gonna be
Welcome to my world.
You've given me so much to think about, and I don't know. I love hearing your passion and your creativity and your heart and just all the ways and all these stories. Like, you have this beautiful ability to just weave all that together. And I just really appreciate your time. Okay, well, I have one last section for you with Melanee. I had to give her a gift. She had her 50th birthday over the holiday, and she had a Kwanzaa celebration, and my oldest 4 kids and I were all set to go, and then several of us got sick. And of course, in today's world, more than ever, we do not want to share our germs with anyone else. So we stayed home and looked forward to the updates from her about the party. So I had a small gift for her, and I went to grab it for her and share it with her. And then the gift sparked all kinds of conversation, because the gift was a Vincent van Gogh notebook that had pictures and journal entries, because I know she's super creative, and I've been super fascinated with Vincent van Gogh because that's one of the upcoming podcasts I'll be doing. And so I was sharing with her all of my excitement about it, and then it sparked all kinds of just energy in our conversation. So I was like, stop, we got to turn the mics back on, and that way I can hear your response. So that's what happened when you were not in the room. Okay, keep talking.
But to me, and again, as I mature in this spiritual journey that I'm on, getting to know God a little bit more every day, the paradoxes of his existence, the justice and mercy, the grace and the love, it's just, it keeps, I always say it keeps me humble and keeps me in awe. And I don't know about you, Julie, but for me, I'm always amazed that he chose me to reveal what little he has. I'm so grateful, because, and I can only come from my experience, but I'm just like, wow, gosh, Lord, had I stayed in that place of pride and hubris, I would have never done anything that I'm doing now. But I would never have such a rich understanding of who he is. And I don't know. I don't even know if I'm explaining it. I don't know if I can explain it. It's just
ineffable.
So beautiful to me how he can love me and be God. I don't even know that. It's like, wow, you are God and you love me. You made me and you love me. And all you want is my love back. It's so simple yet so profound to me. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but that I sit in a state of awe all the time. I just stay in when I'm thinking about God, when I'm talking about him, I stay in a space of awe, and my heart goes out to everyone who doesn't know him. It's like, it's so beautiful over here. It's such a joy over here. It is such, and I was talking to a friend, and she's, as all of us are, don't get me wrong, struggling with control. In a space where they feel like they're out of control. And because they have always been in control, and I am so familiar with this space.
Me too.
Yeah. But they don't know Jesus. And so all of what's that when you're treading water and you're kind of drowning at this point?
Drowning and
despair.
treading.
Yeah, it's this despair. And it's just like, oh, but Jesus is so there. And Jesus, there's such peace and joy in giving up that control and letting go and understanding that God. I remember, because I'm going to tell you, this whole Charlotte adventure has been nothing but God, Jesus. It has been hard, period. But I remember that moment when God made it so clear to me that he loved me and he got me. And it was in that moment where I was like, oh, I really don't have to worry about anything. God's got this. Oh, did I ever tell you, Julie? Okay, I think I did because we talk so much, but when we do talk. So Hayden turned 1, 2, maybe 1 or 2, somewhere where he was talking. And so I grew up with my mom, and we were at church 7 days a week, almost 24 hours a day, it felt like.
Oh, wow.
So I just knew I was not going to do that to my kids. We were not going to live in church. And then coming down here, my church back home, that was one of the blessings of COVID, was being able to connect with them virtually. And it was so funny because the summer before COVID, I had told my pastor, I wish you would record or something so I could hear. And he's like, nah. And so I tease him. I'm like, see, God loves me so much. That's so bad. But he said COVID so that I can hear your voice. Because now I can connect back home. But it was a small family church. And so that's what I'm used to. And when I say family, we weren't blood related, but we definitely were related. It's just wonderful. But I didn't want to be that. So moving here, I couldn't find, I didn't even think I was going to find anything close to what I grew up with. But I was kind of shopping around church. And then it got to a point where I was like, I just stopped. I remember too, Hayden was running around the room playing with his monster trucks. And he just stopped. And see how Jesus is? He was like, I want to learn more about Jesus. Talk about being convicted. I was like, oh gosh, I'm not doing a good job. So we immediately went on this church hunt. And the people that we knew went to a small little church. So we said, we'll try that. But it was Kojic.
What is Kojic?
Church of God in Christ.
Oh, okay.
Which is all new to me because my church at home was non-denominational. It was called Baptist, but it wasn't Baptist. My pastor back home didn't follow any of the rules of church. So even coming down here and being thrust in that world of all the different kinds of church, and they existed in Detroit, it just wasn't where I grew up. We went to the same church and that was it. So Church of God in Christ, they wear dresses. They're very conservative and very prim and proper. And you see me, Julie. I am never going to fit into that. But I was there because they had a small little children's program. My kid wanted to learn about Jesus. This is my first step out. Okay, here we go. Never fit in. Not many people talked to me. The pastor never said a word to me. But we went until we found something else. The moment that we found something else, that was the only time the pastor talked to me. He came and he said, hey, I understand you guys are going to be leaving. And my husband was a truck driver at the time, so it was usually just me and the kids there. And so I was so stunned that he was talking to me. Again, it was one of those moments where I didn't know what to say. I was kind of like, He was like, was it because you just never fit in? And I was like, bingo. And that's what I told him. I was like, bingo. And it struck me, he knew that I didn't fit in and didn't do anything about it. So anyway, but I say all of that to say that God had a reason for me going there. His aunt, the pastor's aunt, was in her 80s at the time. And they had a ministry where they would feed the homeless or feed families. I'm not sure if it was homeless or just families in general, but they asked the congregation to sign up for a day of the week, bring a casserole. They would. So, I love to cook. Yeah, I can do that. It was the day I was bringing my dish in. The church wasn't off. Oh, the church office wasn't open yet, but his aunt was there. So while we're waiting for the secretary to get there to open the office so she could get my casserole, she just starts talking to me. Now, mind you, she's never talked to me the whole time I've been there. We've been there like probably close to a year. She just goes on and she's telling me about the church background, the church history, how the pastor they were from up north and how they moved down here and how they found the building. They couldn't afford the building. And, she's giving me all the church history and I'm, listening. And then she says, and I told him, she says, I'm at the point in my life where I don't worry about nothing. And Julie, I felt, you said you felt me. I felt that. And I remember saying, which I chuckle at now, because you know how they say, be careful what you ask for, what you pray for. I said, I want that kind of faith. Because I knew she meant exactly. When she said she doesn't worry about nothing, I knew she meant that. I was like, that's what I'm looking for.
That's what I'm looking for.
And I believe God was like, okay. So off on the journey we went. But
Wow.
I am at the point where I can clearly say, I don't worry about nothing. God has shown me over and over and over and over again how not only does he have it, but he's got it so much better than I could have ever orchestrated. And if I would just let it go. So my pastor's daughter back home and we have this thing where when things don't go our way or things don't happen, we rub our hands together, be like, all right, God, let's see what you got. That is wonderful to be able to have that kind of relationship with someone you know he's got your back. What do I have to worry about? What do I have to worry about?
And so much more honest, because the times I spend thinking that my worrying does anything, it's insanity.
Except ad reading.
Yes.
That's all it
Yes.
does.
Yes.
And that is and I just want that for everybody.
Mm.
There is like the word says, there is peace and joy in trusting God. There is peace and joy. And so
I'm so glad I turned that microphone back on.
But piggybacking up to the conversation my husband and I were having just before we got here, there's such a heaviness and scared, and there's such, where are we going to go? I even heard, what are we going to do now? In fact, on CBS this morning, they had a where are we now, or what's 2022 going to look like, and they had a clairvoyant, and she was pulling her cards, and it was not looking good. It was kind of like they panned the camera at her when they asked her the question, and she just kind of had this look on her face, and and the interviewer, he's like, oh God, that doesn't bode well. There's such, and when you look at it from that perspective, yeah, when you don't have Jesus, yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah. It looks like we are all just doomed to damnation. But I was able to think, but God, I know the end of the story, so I will always have hope. I know what's going to happen. So yeah, it doesn't look good now. And looking at human history, it ain't going to look good. It ain't going to look good till Jesus get back here. Now, that doesn't negate the work that I need to do, though. That doesn't mean I give up, throw up my hands and say, okay, well, since it's no hope, why try? No, God says no until I come. You got work to do. You got to still tell the truth, no matter what. So that still doesn't mean I get to check out and be like, well, I got God.
So you have all these ways you tell the truth, really. You tell the truth through your book. You tell the truth through Dismantling the Divide. You tell the truth through Closet Creatives, through your work in education, both then and now.
Yeah.
You're a young spirit, an old soul with a new chance to grow. I can't start to compare your love to the size of your heart. If people saw the road you've been down, they would know.